So why don't we go ahead and get started? For those of you who don't know, my name is Adam Stulberg, and I'm the chair of the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs here at Georgia Tech. And really on behalf of my colleagues and the staff at the school, I want to invite you to this really bittersweet memorial event. Bitter, of course, because of the untimely loss of our beloved colleague, Bob, who was really a pillar in our distinguished professors of the practice program at the school, in our European transatlantic studies program, and really as a mentor to all of our students. But of course, sweet, because this provides us an opportunity to sort of wax fondly on all of the warm feelings and memories and legacy that Bob has left us all. It's sort of fitting that we're memorializing Bob here in this room because in the anteroom there's an exhibit, an art exhibit on the honor of Robert Portman, who is a very famous futuristic architect and designer and builder here in Atlanta. And he was known for building these structures that he called entelechy. And entelechy is a Greek word that stands for realized potential. And I think that that is just so apropos because Bob, in many ways, was an international relations polyglot. In short, he did it all. He did it from a policy perspective, both in the executive branch and the congressional side. He did it as a strategist, worked closely with the defense community, not only here in the United States, but with NATO and our allies, and as a teacher. Literally did it all in international relations. I first met Bob maybe 15 or 18 years ago when at Senator Nunn's behest, because Bob was really an expert on arms control and especially the European dimension to arms control. And we were hosting an event here and we were talking about that, and he was sharing his wisdom and that brought the historical perspective as well as bringing a technical and strategic perspective to it. And then fast forwarded, I don't know, 8, 9 years after that, he was telling me he just finished a PhD on top of his 5 retirements. And so I was just bewildered by everything. And of course, we were very pleased to be able to invite him and really as part of our inaugural cohort of distinguished professors of the practice. And so I could certainly go on, but you're not here to hear from me, but really from those who are very close to Bob, both before his time here at Georgia Tech and during that time. And really to help us orchestrate this event is my colleague, Dr. Vicki Birchfield. And Vicki is a longtime professor in the School of International Affairs, but more specifically to our event today is that she has been running our European program, both based in Europe and in terms of our summer program in Brussels, where Bob really became an institution and really Vicki forged a very close relationship with Bob and Vivica. And really Bob left such a grand legacy to that particular program. And as a side, before I ask Vicki to come up here, I was meeting last year actually with graduates of our program. And I was talking to one of them who is currently working at NATO. And he said that every day he is reminded of Bob. And I said, well, he made that great of an impression upon you. And he said, well, yes, but also his picture is hanging right above my desk. So Bob created that office there. And actually, there's a Georgia Tech student in his legacy there. So Vicki, why don't you please walk us through.
Even without his photograph, I can tell you Robert Bell is a legend at NATO headquarters. Thank you so much, Adam. It's a privilege to further extend my welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here for this special occasion to honor the legacy of our dear departed colleague, Dr. Robert Bell, and all the contributions he made beyond all that you know about his biography and things that Adam just mentioned, the many contributions he made in his short time here at the Nunn School for our students and to the broader Georgia Tech community. We're especially pleased to welcome Robert's wife, our guest of honor, in fact, and she is a former diplomat from Denmark, and I'd like to welcome her, Vibeke Rosenbell. I'd also like to welcome members of Robert's family, his sisters, Nancy Kimsey, Susan Biggs, and Janet Isley, and his niece, Erin Kimsey, as well as many of his Air Force Academy classmates and other dear friends of Robert and Vibeke. It's also wonderful to see so many colleagues, faculty colleagues, staff, and so many students. Although it was a very sad occasion for me, I was honored to attend Robert's funeral. It was a very moving ceremony with military honors at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs back in September. During that service and reception, I learned so much more about Robert's life. I didn't think I could possibly learn anything more, having spent so many years with him, learning stories from Vibeke, from colleagues at NATO. But I learned so much more, and I can't share all of those with you here at the podium, but I hope I can share some during the reception. But what I learned at that moving funeral and reception is just how deeply Robert was committed to our country. I always thought of him as my best transatlantic buddy, but his first passion and loyalty was to our country. And it certainly, I'm sorry, it certainly deepened my already tremendous esteem and affection for someone I was so fortunate to call a colleague and a friend. I, like many of my colleagues and students present today, had last seen Robert a mere week or so prior to his passing at the Nunn Forum commemorating NATO's 75th anniversary. It was a very fitting way for him to have his last word on our campus. Robert's comments and his contributions throughout the program were incisive and intellectually astute, as always. And I distinctly recall General Breedlove, who was on a panel with Robert, referring to him as a national treasure. Since Robert was so vibrant and energetic at the forum, none of us could have imagined that that would be the last time that we would see him. And so I'm all the more grateful to General Breedlove for expressing such a well-deserved and meaningful approbation, a true national treasure. And I'm glad he got to hear that and let it sink in. But I have to tell you, it's not the first time I'd heard that. On one of the many occasions I had, along with the students, to be hosted by Robert Bell at NATO headquarters, where he organized an extraordinary day-long visit with high-level briefings for us. More than one of the impressive guest speakers would come in the room and describe him in the same manner, a national treasure. So it's in that spirit that we are convened this afternoon to pay tribute to and celebrate the life and service of Robert Gregory Bell. To do so, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers who knew Robert in different capacities, from his time on Capitol Hill to the years he spent at NATO headquarters, and of course, the precious 6 years that we had to call him one of our own here at Georgia Tech. Our first distinguished speaker needs no introduction, but for the benefit of some of our younger students, I would like to share that Senator Sam Nunn, for whom our school is named, served in the US Senate for 24 years, from the mid-1970s to 1997, where he was an influential chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And among his many accomplishments was the landmark Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Bill, which would also shape his post-Senate career as he devoted his energies to the Nuclear Threat Initiative, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working to reduce the risk of use and prevent the spread of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, a commitment that I know he shared deeply with the years he had to work with Robert Bell. So Senator Nunn, it's always an honor to have you among us, and I welcome you to the podium.
Thank you very much, Vicki, and thank you for your wonderful friendship and partnership with Bob. I know that you two work together on a number of things, and you really put together a great bow on Bob very quickly after his passing at the Air Force Academy. So thank you for all you've done. Vibeke, what a love Bob had for you. You were a wonderful, wonderful partner in every way. The whole family meant so much to Bob, and I've listened to him talk about that family for a long time and treasured his remarks and his love. And I know that we have his sisters here today. I haven't met them yet, but I plan to. Susan and Nancy and Janet and Erin, the niece, is Erin here. And I understand you're following that career of foreign service and overall involvement. I know Bob's very, very proud of you. So what a legacy and what a life. Bob Bell was really special. We gather today with profound gratitude for that life, for Bob Bell's exemplary life of service and leadership. What about our friend Bob? Let's start by calling him at least one time the title he earned with determination, sacrifice, and hard work by receiving his doctorate at age 74. That title, Dr. Robert Bell, Distinguished Professor of the Practice at the Georgia Tech Sam Nunn School of International Affairs. He earned that title and was very, very proud when he went back to school. An amazing performance after a career where most people would have been retired to the golf course, and Bob Bell was just getting started. What about Bob's amazing life of service on the road to Georgia Tech that Vicki has captured so well? From the Air Force Academy, U.S. Air Force Academy, to 6 years in the U.S. Air Force, from a master's degree at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy to the Congressional Research Service, from key staff positions on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he worked for Senator Chuck Percy, and the Senate Armed Services Committee, where he worked for all of us, but at that stage I was chairman, to President Clinton's National Security Council, from NATO Assistant Secretary General to the private sector as Vice President of SAIC in Europe, big job, from the U.S. Defense Advisor at NATO to the Secretary of Defense's representative in Europe, back to Fletcher for his doctorate, and finally to Georgia Tech as a valued and cherished member of the Nunn School faculty. A brief Bob Bell, Sam Nunn history. When I became chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I told my staff director, some of you know him, Arnold Pernaro. At that time, Arnold was a Marine reservist, later became the head of the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. But I told Arnold as staff director that his job was to find really key people. Didn't care what political party they were. We wanted key people that had knowledge and experience. I said, one thing, Arnold, one mandatory requirement, those we hire to fill the key professional positions, in my words, Arnold, they have to be smarter than you and smarter than me, both. Arnold quickly replied without hesitation, that will be very easy. And it was. Arnold continued, perhaps without quite the respect he might have developed at that time, but nevertheless, he continued with a lot of confidence. He said, my first recommendation is Bob Bell. And Senator, he does not need an IQ test. And he said, the great news is neither will we in comparison. We will not have to have one because he is a slam dunk smarter than you or me. And Arnold was right. Arnold described Bob as the gold standard. He was right about that. Bob became a most valuable player for the Armed Services Committee, for the Senate, for Congress, for the National Security Council, for NATO, for Georgia Tech, and indeed for our nation. And I would include the globe, because Bob was all about working with allies to keep the world safe and to prevent conflict. Bob developed an encyclopedic knowledge of treaties, executive agreements, statutes, and rules applicable to national security and foreign policy issues. He knew how to explain them clearly and with examples. Bob's explanations were understandable even to U.S. senators. If I only had 2 words to describe Bob's life and legacy, they would be number 1, exemplary, and number 2, I asked one of his buddies, Andy Effron, who was an outstanding lawyer and later on the Military Court of Appeals, I asked him, knowing that I was going to make remarks today, I said, what 1 word would you use to describe Bob? He thought a minute and he said, respect, respect. So 2 words that I would use if I had only 2, exemplary, and the second, respect. Bob's remarkable life of service to our nation was indeed exemplary. Google tells us that exemplary means the best of its kind, or as good as it can possibly be. That was Bob Bell. He inspired us with his life of exemplary service. He set an example for us all, and especially for young people. And I'm delighted to see our students here today. That's really all about Bob. The second word, respect, too often missing in our nation today. The word respect is enormously important in democracies. Respect was a constant and important feature of Bob's personal as well as his professional life. Respect and concern for those in uniform and for their families. Respect for our Constitution, particularly the separation and sharing of powers among the congressional, executive, and judicial branches of government. Bob knew that for our constitutional system to work, each branch had to respect the other 2. And we're testing that proposition today in our nation. Bob had great respect for the rule of law at home and abroad. He had respect for our allies, as those that work with him on NATO well understand. He had respect for the customs and the norms guiding government service, guiding military operations, judicial independence, the legislative process, and congressional oversight. Bob Bell was a teacher before he became a doctor. Bob taught us all. When he became Dr. Robert Bell, his lucky students here at Georgia Tech became the fortunate beneficiaries of his clarity of thought, his superb logic, his rational explanations, his knowledge of history, his real life experiences, and of course his keen questions, and I'm sure that was reflected in the exams he gave the students. Because of his respect for others, Bob listened, Bob heard, Bob understood, particularly the views of his students and his faculty colleagues, which he treasured. Bob spoke modestly, but with great clarity. The result, when Bob Bell spoke, we listened. We knew that his values and his character shaped his conclusions. We followed his guidance, and we followed his sound advice. It has been said that a teacher affects eternity. We cannot know where his or her influence stops. Dr. Robert Bell's influence and spirit will not stop. They will live on through all of us who were his students and who were blessed by his lessons, his friendship, his respect, his exemplary life, and his example. Thank God for Bob Bell.
Thank you, Senator Nunn. Our next distinguished speaker is retired General Philip Breedlove, who, like Robert, served as one of our distinguished professors of the practice, which we affectionately refer to as our DPOPs. General Breedlove is a proud Yellow Jacket, commissioned in 1977 as a distinguished graduate of Georgia Tech's ROTC program with a degree in civil engineering. General Breedlove also served our country for over 39 years and reached the highest levels of military leadership as one of the 6 geographic combatant commanders and the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and Commander of U.S. European Command. Unfortunately, the general took a tumble on a bicycle and broke several ribs and was forbidden to travel. But he was really committed to being with us here, and I think he's online now. So welcome, General Breedlove.
Well, first of all, thank you. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, great. That's what I wanted to see. Well, Vicki, thank you for that overly kind introduction. And the beauty of what I have to say, it's very short, and you and the senator have already made 3 of my primary remarks. So there'll be a tiny bit of redundancy, which is good for fighter pilots and infantry officers. The first thing I would like to say is what I said when we closed at the forum you talked about, and that is that Bob was a national treasure, and his work will remain a national treasure. And that says an awful lot about how he has affected our nation, and in the second short remarks I make, our school. I don't know Bob as well as some of you because I only met him in May of 2013 when I became the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. But we fast grew to be great teammates, and that's my first descriptive word. Bob is a teammate to those he works with, and he became a great teammate of mine as he helped to educate a young hot-headed fighter pilot who was trying to lead an alliance through a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Bob, many don't understand some of the jobs he had. The job he had at NATO was incredibly important during my time, where essentially he was the #2 person in our U.S. delegation to NATO. He had the unenviable position of having 2 bosses, something that we in the military try immensely to avoid. He had accreditation and responsibility both to the Secretary of State and the Defense Secretary in our United States, and he served them both with distinction, and he was an amazing representative of our nation to NATO. As I said, he was a teammate, but he soon became a friend, and he will always remain a friend of mine. I would tell you that in those first years, as I tried to learn how to manage 28 nations' militaries and present to the civilian leaders of NATO, who are the real authority, how to present them with options that would answer the tough questions being asked by Russia and Europe, Bob became a trusted confidant. I want to tell you that the thing I first remember about those times is how patient he was with me, and how in his patience he would help me to work through some of my, what shall we say, extra energy as I was trying to get the right positions in front of decision makers. And I want to tell you that also as a trusted confidant, I learned almost immediately the deep knowledge that Bob had of how America acts in the alliance and how America should lead in the alliance. And I thank him to this day for what he taught me. I want to now use a word that will tie the first part of my presentation to the second part of my presentation. And I hope that the family will agree with me, because this is an outside the family observation. But Bob was a talented and practiced listener. When you were talking to Bob, he was listening to you, not formulating his reply yet. He was actually listening to what you had to say. And this is important, I think, at senior levels of leadership. And Bob would listen to me. I think sometimes when halfway through my presentation, he had already described, I'm going to have to help him through this. But he would always listen to me, and I valued the fact that he was paying attention to what I said. I saw him then bridge that into his time as a distinguished professor of the practice at Georgia Tech, which was the second time I got to work with Bob, and times I will never forget and ever treasure, just like that Sam Nunn Forum that we did a week before he passed. I treasure that time with Bob sitting at that table and talking. I was struck. I just got to tell you, when he said, I'm going to finish my PhD, I'm like, Bob, good grief. Everybody knows you. Your bona fides are just gilded in gold. Why in the world? But he was driven to accomplish that PhD, and I respected him immensely for how he went after that. His wisdom really added to the world's level of knowledge through the studies that he made. I think that it's sort of important to note that each DPOP, as Vicki described us, we kind of love that, actually. All of us DPOPs really approach our job differently. Some are amazing people, but because of where they live, they pass through. Others engage at a level that they can and truly value being with students. This is where I find myself. But I must tell you that Bob redefined all of that. If you wanted to write a paper to say this is a DPOP, then just write the bio of how Bob Bell engaged at Georgia Tech. He really cared. In closing, I would tell you, I think he's about them Atlanta Braves. He has already heard multiple times, well done, good and faithful servant. Thank you.
Thank you, General Breedlove. Next, I'm delighted to welcome Erin Kimsey. Erin, Bob's niece, is the Burma or Myanmar unit chief in the Office of Mainland Southeast Asian Affairs, Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs, U.S. Department of State. We're especially grateful that she could make it, especially having worked around the clock dealing with the tragedy of the earthquake in Myanmar. Erin previously served as a RAN watcher at the U.S. Consulate General in Istanbul and a desk officer at the U.S. mission to ASEAN. She also did political tours in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Before joining the Foreign Service in 2012, she worked with an NGO in China's Yunnan province, promoting multilingual education in ethno-linguistic minority communities. She's originally from North Carolina, and like her uncle, she pursued her graduate education at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, where she earned a Master's of Arts in Law and Diplomacy. I should note that Erin will be speaking today in her role as Robert's niece and not in an official capacity as a Foreign Service officer. Erin, thank you so much for traveling to be with us here today.
Thank you so much, Vicki. And thank you so much to this entire school, I believe. It was incredible to see my uncle really embrace this final chapter of his life and how he found a true community here, not just of people with lots of life experience, but amongst the students as well. I know how much he loved being here and interacting with the students. So Vicki, thank you for hosting us. I have to say it's quite an honor and a challenge to speak after Senator Nunn and General Breedlove. Senator Nunn, I've often wondered what it must have been like for my uncle in Washington as a young man, getting his start under your mentorship. And we're thankful for the wise and thoughtful policymaking and the contributions that you've made to our country over the many years. I had the chance in 2016 to work at the Nuclear Security Summit, one of those times that feels like the Super Bowl of diplomacy, where delegations are coming from all over the world and the State Department has to pull officers from every single office throughout the department to staff these delegations. It was quite inspiring because I know that your work contributed to that sort of event reducing the threat of nuclear risk around the world. And for General Breedlove, who is not here with us today, but perhaps maybe listening, when I had the chance to serve in Afghanistan I was working at the US Embassy, but it was also amongst US and NATO allied soldiers. It was such a wonderful thing to see the unique contributions that every single NATO allied state brought to the table and how much stronger we were together. And so I know that that was much to do with General Breedlove's leadership during that time too. So as Vicki noted today, I'm speaking as a family member, not as a diplomat. And I'd just like to share three life lessons that I have observed in the life of Robert Bell that have guided me oftentimes, who many people knew as Dr. Bell or Robert, and I simply knew as Uncle Bob. First, the joy of lifelong learning. Second, the skill and practice of convening people. And then finally, the value of close friends. The joy of lifelong learning. I, like many people here, was very surprised when I heard that my uncle was going back to school. I thought, okay, you've done the Hill, you've done the Air Force, you've done the White House, the private sector, NATO. Is this really necessary? And what more could you possibly have to learn? But I, like many of you here, really respected that he had no sense of pride or I'm too good to go back to school. He had an attitude of learning and the pleasure of engaging with students from every single generation and exchanging ideas in a real respectful way. I found that very inspiring. He also was committed to his alumni network at the Fletcher School. Often he would travel to London or to Switzerland, where there would be seminars each summer or winter, because he really valued meeting people with new ideas and the next generation of experts. Many people here probably experienced him, know his skill in teaching in a much better way than I do. But one other thing that I loved, and I think his French was legendary. He mastered the capacity to speak about nuclear security and arms control in French, yet he could not ever lose that American accent, the strongest American accent you have ever heard, the French language. But I think that really characterized just the sort of the joy and enthusiasm of putting yourself out there for the sake of connecting and exchanging ideas and not being too proud to do that. Second, Uncle Bob had a skill and a lifelong habit of convening people and bringing them together and creating a sense of connection and community that did not previously exist. Sometimes he would do this with the power of a story. I think if you spent more than a couple minutes with him, you'd find yourself sitting back and starting to settle into a story, wondering where it was going to go, and then suddenly it all came together and illuminated a policy idea or helped perhaps reduce tension between people who disagreed in the professional world. He also had a habit of building camaraderie in the workplace by recognizing people's accomplishments. One summer in 2011, I had the privilege of working at the US mission to NATO and staying with Viveka as well and Uncle Bob. And while I was working in the political section, I didn't have a lot of visibility on what Uncle Bob was doing in the defense section. But every Friday afternoon, the mission had a weekly look-ahead meeting, and sometimes the task fell to Uncle Bob to convene that meeting. And what he would do is go around the table and before we looked at the week ahead, he reflected on the week that had just passed and started highlighting individual accomplishments. People from different sections of the mission all sitting around the table, helping us understand each other's work, helping us respect each other better, building a sense of camaraderie and teamwork that I have certainly tried to apply in my own career. But he also kind of had a similar practice at family gatherings too. Anytime that our scattered family got together, living in different places, different countries, different states, whether we were meeting in Washington or Brussels or even Texas sometimes, you knew that at some point in the dinner, there would be a moment when the toasting and the reflections and the accolades would come out. And it was always Uncle Bob who would initiate, and it was always Uncle Bob who was taking that time to recognize what was going on in each family member's life. And so the very last time that I was in the same place and saw him, actually it was a very difficult time because it was in the wake of the death of his son. And many of us had gathered together in Washington to support. And there were family and friends and longtime neighbors who had never even met each other before. Some longtime old friends, some new faces. And by practicing this, this bringing people together and convening, he turned what was a very tragic and difficult situation into a moment that really crystallized community and family unity. He went around the table and he knew what was happening in every single person's life and spoke kind and affirming words to everyone around the table. And then, of course, raised his glass. And he turned what was a difficult time into a very precious moment in that season. And that somewhat leads to the third and final lesson that I have taken from my uncle, which is the priceless value of close friends. Everyone who is in school right now has probably heard of the impossible trinity, with the unattainable, you can have good grades and sleep, or good grades and friendships and or social life. You can pick 2 out of 3, but you can never have all 3, grades, sleep, and social life. I was not around at the Air Force Academy in 1969, and I was not at the Fletcher School in the 1970s. But I know that at least one of the 2 that he picked was the social life, because it resulted in lifelong friendships that stuck with him all the way to the very last days of his life. When Uncle Bob passed away, he was surrounded by his Air Force buddies who had been helping him, been with him his entire life, who had listened to him unburden his heart during that time in Colorado, who rushed him to the hospital and then took care of Vivica as well at the very end. And that is really a testimony to the investment that that Uncle Bob put into friendships, making the time to travel and meet, making the time to stay in touch. And is someone who is finding myself, increasingly under those demands of a career. I think that's something really important to remember, that at the end of the day, the career is important, but friends and family are more important. So many of us, just in closing, I think many of us may be struggling. If you're studying international relations, kind of wondering, well, what does the future look like? There's a lot of assumptions that, perhaps I started my degree at a time where there were different assumptions, and now there's different things happening, and the world may seem very uncertain. Actually, none of us know what tomorrow is going to bring, none of us at all. And I think regardless of what is happening externally, I think living by these 3 principles can really, and these practices, really is something that will be an anchor and steadying throughout the uncertainty that people about to graduate might face right now. So I'll just close there, and thank you again, Vicki, and to the entire Sam Nunn School. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. I know the students are going to be fast approaching you at the reception. So, so finally, I'm pleased to invite 2 students to the podium who came to know Professor Bell well during the summer of 2022 when they participated in our EU Transatlantic Relations Study Abroad program. During that summer, I should point out that Dr. Bell helped inspire the founding of the Model NATO team at Georgia Tech. And under the leadership of these 2 students, this past February, at the 40th Annual International Model NATO Conference held in Washington, D.C., the group won the overall Outstanding Delegation Award, representing the United States, nonetheless. And that's the equivalent of first place at this conference. And this marked the 2nd consecutive year that the team won that award, outperforming schools such as Georgetown University, the U.S. Air Force Academy, and several international schools. I know how proud Dr. Bell would have been of you guys. So please join me in congratulating them and welcoming graduating senior Kaylin Nolan and master student Tyler Quillen to the podium.
Well, hello everyone. I'm so happy to see so many faces, both familiar and new here, to celebrate the life of an amazing man, Dr. Robert Bell. My friend Kaylin and I are here to speak briefly on how Dr. Bell touched our lives and those of so many students here at Georgia Tech. And, and abroad. When I met Dr. Bell, I must admit, I didn't know him. I didn't know who he was. We were in Europe at the time, summer of 2022, and we had just been out of town and were taking the bus back into town, speaking about what we had been doing, what lay ahead for the program. And we, as we're talking, we heard someone behind us go, "Oh, you're Georgia Tech students?" And turning around, I came face to face with the man I would come to know as Dr. Bell. For the rest of that bus ride, we had the pleasure of getting to speak with him, talking about what we were doing. He asked about the program, what we were studying, about us. I remember at the time thinking how kind it was for him to spend that time with us, and how I just appreciated him passing along the wisdom of both his studies, wisdom for our studies, and wisdom about living in Europe. But I really had no idea at the time what a huge impact he would have on me, our whole cohort, and the school overall. And I'll let Kaylin tell you all about that.
Yes, thank you, Tyler. As he mentioned, Dr. Bell has changed both of our lives, and it started that day on the bus. However, he did not tell us how he would later impact us on the study abroad trip. He did not mention that he was going to be a huge part of how we were able to attend NATO headquarters. He kept that to himself, and we ran into him about a month later in a different country, and he said, "Welcome to NATO headquarters." And hopefully I can speak for Tyler as well in saying that that trip alone changed the trajectory of my career ambitions, as well as what I want to pursue as a student, but also, an individual. So at NATO headquarters, Dr. Bell assigned a full day of wonderful invitations with people who changed our life and showed us a lot, including the NATO, Finland, and Swedish ambassadors who are currently in 2022 attempting to gain accession, and they did. So it was wonderful to see them, and they shared their thoughts to us, which was all created by Dr. Bell. And when both of them walked in, they greeted Dr. Bell first and just said how amazing he was. And I think that was not the first indication, but a very firm indication of we did not know who we were in the room with and how amazing of a man he was. And just to provide some insight, I had no idea what I wanted to do as a first year who I was attending this trip. I was thinking about changing my major. I didn't really understand the value of an international affairs career. However, that day alone and from then on, the relationship that I developed with Dr. Bell changed my life and made me realize that I had a passion for geopolitics and transatlantic security that I've continued from that day on. And I'll let Tyler speak a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't say enough about the impact that he made, and that day at NATO made on both of us. Additional people I can remember off the top of my head meeting was a U.S. Air Force rep to NATO, and as well the head of the NATO nuclear deterrence policy, tech grad. And then even beyond that, later that day afterwards, Dr. Bell invited us to come to his house, where we got to speak more with him, his wonderful wife, and so many more of the people we had met at NATO that day. And it was just, it opened my eyes to the possibilities of what diplomacy is. It showed the human side of diplomacy that Dr. Bell exemplified, having made so many friends and so many connections that he knew both professionally and would have over to his house for a house party. And it was really just an amazing day. And it reshaped as well my view of NATO, bringing it from, I knew the history of it as an organization that was a big part of the Cold War, but it really brought it to the forefront of my view, showing how important of a security structure it is for the United States and so many other nations. And I'll let Kaylin speak more about how that has impacted both of us.
Yes. At the event after NATO headquarters tour, and we were at the reception, Tyler and I and a few other students were joking about how Model UN is amazing, but Model NATO could be even better, which is our humble opinions. But we were talking about this, and Dr. Bell came up to us and said, that's a great idea. You should really pursue that. And after that summer, Tyler and I and a few other students were founding members of Georgia Tech's Model NATO Club, which has just completed its third year. And next year we will be representing Poland. But it was such an amazing experience to be at NATO headquarters and then to go on to do our own Model NATO team and show other students the amazing abilities of NATO and what an amazing organization it is, which really, again, was all started by Dr. Bell and his encouragement that we should pursue this amazing opportunity, which, as Dr. Birchfield mentioned, we were very successful in our past 2 years. And I think it's because of the dedication and excitement that was created in our organization that started in 2022 on our European Study Abroad program. So if we were talking about this earlier today, actually, and if we were to describe Dr. Bell, it would be role model, hands down. His amazing, illustrious career in the US Senate, in the White House, NATO, first and foremost, has really inspired us to follow in his footsteps and aspire to be just anything in his image. So,
I mean, yeah, just in summary, both of us represent just a few of the many, many, many students Dr. Bell has impacted in his long career. I mean, to see so many faces here today to celebrate his life is a testament to how many lives he touched in such a great way. I feel incredibly grateful for what Dr. Bell did for us and for so many other students, and lucky to have met him. And my life is all the better for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaylin and Tyler. Again, there's no other more powerful testament to Robert's legacy than that, influencing students and future leaders who will be as devoted to transatlantic bonds and mutual commitments to democracy, freedom, and security as was our dear departed Robert Bell. And so it's now that I turn to our newly established Robert G. Bell Memorial Scholarship. I want to first extend profound gratitude to Vibeke, whose suggestion that in lieu of flowers, those who mourn the loss of Robert do something he would have wanted, something for the students. So the conversation began with our fantastic team at the Ivan Allen College, the head of development, Lauren Kennedy, and her associate, Laura Gregory, and Robert's Air Force Academy roommate and lifelong friend, Stephen Huntley. Thanks to the efforts of these individuals and many of the contributions of you all here with us today, we're pleased to announce that we have achieved sufficient funds to put us on the path towards an endowment and to make an inaugural award today. The award is intended to support a student who demonstrates a commitment to pursuing a career path inspired by Robert Bell in his contributions to NATO and arms control, global security, and nuclear nonproliferation. The inaugural 2025 Robert G. Bell Memorial Scholarship goes to Sawyer Pifo. Are you here? Well, we'll congratulate you. And thank you. I would like to quote Sawyer's application or statement. So, just as Robert Bell navigated complex challenges of global security, my goal is to immerse myself in the study of European politics and transatlantic cooperation, ensuring that the bonds between the United States and its European allies remain strong in an era of concerning shifts in transatlantic geopolitics, end quote. Congratulations, Sawyer. May you continue to learn from Robert's formidable legacy and his steadfast belief that the United States' national interest and security could best be achieved through persistent dialogue and cooperation with our allies. We have a lot of fun in store this summer, learning and following in the footpath of Robert Bell. So I look forward to that. And there are more details for your scholarship. Thank you very much. An added joy of working with Robert was getting to know his wife of 21 years, Vibeke Rosenbell. As I mentioned, a former diplomat herself from Denmark, an expert on European affairs, and an equal to Robert in holding forth with deep historical knowledge and insight into the pressing challenges facing the transatlantic community, especially the war in Ukraine, and from which I and many of the students here and other colleagues who were fortunate to be with me, Dr. Eliza Markley, we were lucky to be exposed to and benefit from your insight and knowledge and wisdom. And we were graciously, as the students mentioned, hosted many times in your lovely home in Brussels after our long and exhausting day at NATO, where we thought we would just cool our heels, but no, Vibeke wanted to question the students about what they learned, who did they hear from, and so forth. So thank you, Vibeke, for sharing Robert with us and for your own significant contributions and support for our students. And with that, I would invite you to have a few words if you'd like.
Well, thank you so much. And first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I don't know that Robert would have imagined all these tributes that's been paid to him. He was a very modest man. And so I want to thank you, Senator Nunn. His years with you were really shaping him, and you were the mentor that he needed to become what he was. And thank you also to General Breedlove, who worked with, I'm sorry you're not here, and to you, Professor Vicky, of course. I used to call you the hen mother of the students abroad, because you were always taking care of them and helping them with everything. So I think this was something very special to honor my beloved husband, Robert Bell. And then second, I want to give a big, now I don't know where you're down now, big congratulations to Jean Pifko. Did I say it correct? Yeah. The winner of the scholarship that we set up and that the school has worked so hard in getting together. I think this was very special, and Sawyer's wish to apply what he had learned from Robert in his future life was very, very important. And you have not met him. So I think that was very, very special. And it warms my heart to know that Robert's work in the area of global security will be carried forward. But having said this, I want to emphasize that there were a lot of you who said some very good things about him. So it wasn't an easy choice, as I understand it. But anyway, I'm not surprised that you were doing so well, all of you, because Robert often spoke about how amazing he was with the students here, how brilliant you were, and he loved his teaching. He really enjoyed teaching these classes. And if I can just mention, lots of things have been said already, but what runs through, I think, from what we get from the students is his generosity with his time, took his time to talk to the students, and his passion for what he was doing, and his happiness with teaching that I already mentioned, and his brilliant mind, and his humble nature. He would never boast of anything he had done. Yeah. So he was very down to earth. But one student's remarks, and we've just heard her, Kaylin, was actually saying, and you have met him, that the day, and I quote from what she wrote, that day, the visit to NATO and being able to see the tremendous work and impact that Dr. Bell has had, as well as being part of the reception at your home, significantly moved me. I changed the trajectory of my career. I think that is the most flattering you could say about what the impact of Robert. And for that, I'll be eternally grateful. Dr. Bell will be remembered by everyone for his work, his impact, and his legacy. I thought that was wonderful. So, but one thing that hasn't really been mentioned here is that he had a great sense of humor. And he loved to talk about and sort of funny stories that related to his life and his career. And another quote here is from a NATO ambassador that he worked with. And he wrote to me when Robert had passed. He said how he appreciated his sharp mind and deep thinking. And I loved his common sense and humor. A few years ago, after participating in Atlantic Council conference in Budva, Montenegro, we shared a car ride to the airport. It was a hair-raising experience, as the driver kept overtaking trucks on narrow winding roads. We were looking at each other petrified. At our destination, we looked at each other and said, now we need a stiff drink. And he was saying, that is the way I like to remember him. On top of his expertise and wisdom that he generally shared with many of us, he had this sense of humor, and he was a happy man. Yes, Robert was a happy man. And this has already been mentioned as well, that when many other retired men devote their time to playing golf and mowing the lawn, Robert started studying for a PhD. It had always been a thorn in his flesh that he didn't finish the PhD he started on after he left the career of the Air Force. But life took over, so he didn't manage to do it. Now he had the chance. And in 2021, he graduated from Tufts University with a PhD in international security studies. His topic was burden sharing. And there is a lot of talk about burden sharing here, and we think about money. He also had a finger in that. At the Whale Summit in 2014, he was part of those who convinced the member states that they should make a pledge to get up to 2% defense spending. But in his PhD, it didn't have to do with money. It had to do with nuclear weapons. And the issue was, did it hurt member states who did not participate in nuclear policy by not providing territory for the stationing of nuclear weapons, or who didn't want to provide planes or participate with planes that could carry them? His conclusion was no. And this is a topic that has become very relevant in these days, but now upside down, because more countries are thinking about getting nuclear weapons. In Europe, I could mention Poland as one of them. So let me conclude by saying he was a happy man and I was a happy woman being married to him for 23 years. 23 years, he's such a wonderful man. He had a warm heart, and that was felt by everybody. I miss him terribly. He was the love of my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Vibeke. Before I invite you all to enjoy conversation and the reception, please join me in thanking our speakers, but also Eric Koob and Mary-Lou Suarez, who did so much to make this event possible. And thank you all for being here. And thank you again to those of you who've made a contribution to the Robert G. Bell Memorial Scholarship. And congratulations to our first recipient, Sawyer. Thank you very much. Enjoy the reception. And here's to Robert Bell.